Hey everyone, tarekith here, and today I want to talk about the Make Noise Zero Coast or No Coast. I have to admit, for some reason internally, I've just kind of combined those, and I always call it the O Coast. So please bear with me if I kind of use the wrong name. For some reason, it's just stuck in my head that this is the O Coast. Like a lot of people, I've kind of been paying attention to the whole modular resurgence lately, and even been contemplating putting my own system together. But I realized pretty quickly that was going to be kind of expensive for what I wanted to do, and I wasn't sure it really would be a workflow that would kind of suit the way I like to write music. So I've been kind of paying attention to the more self-contained modules, the Mother 32, some of the Erica Pico synths, and when I saw the Make Noise O-Coast, I was really interested because I've always kind of been drawn towards that Buchla style of synthesis. I mean, I like the fact that it's different than your standard subtractive synthesis, which I'm a little fried on, if I'm honest. So to have that kind of workflow in something that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, or the rest of your body, if you're talking about Buchla stuff, was pretty appealing. So let's take a look at some of the functionality of the O-Coast, what it can do, and then I'll come back and tell you some of my thoughts on it in the end. I'll be honest, I won't have a lot of patch examples in this review. I'll have some at the end I can play for you, but I'm still kind of finding my way around the O-Coast and how I want to use it in my own music. And I'll be honest, a lot of it kind of tends to be more atonal, weird noise-scape things that kind of I'm drawn to that might not be the most enjoyable to listen to, even though it's fun to play with at the time. So I'll have some of those at the end if you're interested about how this thing sounds. Anyway, let's dive in a little closer and take a look at how the O-Coast works. Okay, so now we're zoomed in a little closer so you can get a better overview of the front panel. Some people have commented on the legending, the writing on here is kind of a weird font. Personally, it didn't really bother me at all. It's pretty easy to see what's going on. Helpfully, all the different pre-configured routing options are in gold, so you can see what is routed to where and which parameters control which other functions and things like that. You don't need any patch cables to actually make noise with this right out of the box. I'm using my push 2 to play it. It comes with a power supply, which plugs in the left-hand side. On the left-hand side also is the Midi input. It's on a 3.5mm jack like everything else on the unit, although they do include an adapter cable in the box if you want to use a standard Midi DIN cable, so that's included. You don't have to worry about that. The output, again, 3.5mm jack. It'll drive a standard line out as well as headphone outputs, which is really nice. You can just kind of take this and sit with that on your lap and make some sounds. Kind of usefully, the final output volume knob kind of has got like a detented position, or at least it's marked on the panel, so you can actually turn it past that to overdrive the output if you want, and there's even a helpful little clip LED that lights up so you can see when you're actually overdriving the output for a little bit more grit to it. The Midi input's kind of interesting. By default, your Midi notes and gate are already pre-routed. You can see that the Midi input A is automatically mapped to pitch and to the gate input of the contour. The contour generator is basically like an envelope generator. Roughly, it does some other neat tricks that are kind of cool. It also has a Midi B input. This is kind of nice. This is where a lot of the flexibility of the O-Coast comes in. These two outputs here can be multiple different functions. CV output can be things like you can take notes from like another MIDI input source if you have like a different MIDI channel. You can output velocity. There's built-in Lfos inside the unit that this output will output a triangle LFO, and this one will output a square wave LFO. Those can be synced to tempo automatically, or you can tap the tempo. Again, you can tap the tempo up here as well. There's basically two different tempo sources. So there's a lot of flexibility there. You can only have one of these at a time, and you can change them from the front panel if you want. There's different button combinations. The combinations are actually printed on a sticker on the back, so you don't even need the manual to remember what they are, which is quite handy. The next section we have here, you can output directly a tempo if you want from the tap button to control like gate functions. There's also a clock output, and you can see you can tap faster for a faster clock. There's a random output generator, which can be used as all kinds of different source modulations. We also have part of their Make Noise Maths unit here, which this unit's quite functional here. This little section here, you can use this to split one input into two outputs with positive and negative polarity. You can combine two different inputs into one output, or you can combine two different inputs into two different outputs. And helpfully there's an LED here to kind of help show you what's going on. There's a lot of flexibility. You'll use this quite a bit because you can take one source, CV source, and route to multiple destinations and vice versa. And when you factor in something like a multiple cable, you know, you really get a lot of flexibility out of this one little circuit here. Very, very handy. The next section here is the main oscillator. You can have a direct oscillator output for the triangle wave and a square wave. Normally these go to this balance output, which I'll talk about in a second. There's a master pitch and a fine pitch. This is useful for tuning the oscillators. I didn't quite realize, just being a newbie to modular synthesis, the oscillator itself wouldn't be tuned specifically to any pitch when it's at its slowest setting. The fine tuning actually is quite a wide range, so even though it says fine tuning, it covers a couple octaves at least. You can also apply, you know, modulation source directly to the oscillator, as well as do linear FM, controlling the amount here. The next section is your overtone section. This is kind of the whole West Coast style synthesis. Instead of having a filter that removes different overtones and higher frequencies, you're actually adding them in. This multiply will take the overtones and actually add more overtones on top of things, and again, the positive and negative polarity amount. And like a lot of different sections on you, there's this little handy window again. This little LED lights up that really shows you what's going on. Those are super, super helpful. Next up is the slope section, which is again another really useful thing. This can either be with the cycle off, it can function as an envelope. With the cycle on, it can function as an LFO. So if you wanted to route, let's say, the slope output to the overtone, which I just realized it's by default routed to that. One of the cool things about the slope generator is that not only does it function as an LFO, but you can actually change the LFO shape by changing the rise time or the fall time, basically your attack and decay. So you can do things like make not only just your standard kind of triangle wave LFOs, but sawtooth and things like that. And you can also, because it does go into audio rates, the slope function generator will also function as another oscillator, which is quite cool. You can modulate the time, you can set it to trigger if you're using it as an envelope. You can take the slope output to any other input on the device, which is quite cool. And it even has like an end of cycle function, which makes the slope output also function as a sort of gate generator. So again, a lot of functionality packed in just these few little sections of controls. The contour is kind of like your envelope on a normal synth, or at least a subtractive synth, I should say. Again, a handy little LED there so you can see exactly what's going on as this triggers. And you can change the decay from exponential to linear. So it's great for like percussive sounds. If you want to do like make, you know, noise sounds or drum synths, things like that. You'll get a lot of use out of this exponential and linear functionality. Then we have the balance control. This controls between the raw oscillator output and the overtone section. So that's just this single oscillator. And you'd also patch the square wave directly into this if you want the square wave instead of the triangle. And then turning it clockwise brings in the overtones. So that's the balance circuit. Next up we have the dynamic circuit, which is kind of like a cross between sort of a volume gate and filter. It gets progressively duller and quieter as you lower it. And of course you can route all kinds of things to both the balance control as well as dynamics control. So there's a lot of functionality packed in here. Each one of these different modules can, you know, do many different things. It's not just like you have an envelope and it's just an envelope, or you have an LFO, it's just an LFO. Even the fact that you can like take raw outputs of the oscillator, you can either take, you know, the square output if you want, or you can use the standard triangle output. You know, there's a lot of functionality there for sure. And even without having any patch cables inserted at all, It's quite easy to, just play it like a normal synth and still get quite a bit of flexibility over the tonal shape of things. So here I'm taking the random generator into the mass unit, change the speed, slow it down with tap tempo. We can take an LFO output from Midi B and go into, let's say, pitch. Anyway, you could spend all day patching things up with this and come up with completely different results every single time, and that's what makes this so much fun. As you can see, like I said, there's a lot of functionality packed in this little tiny unit, and even if you have another modular system, but the fact you can use like the mass units or the slip units to drive your other gear makes this a really good value for the money. So that's kind of a quick overview of the front panel. Like I said, I'm not going to spend too much time going in and making patches. There's plenty of other patches online, people who are vastly more accomplished with this already than I am. So I definitely would recommend checking out some other videos if you need more sound examples. But let's kind of take a step back and I'll give you my overview thoughts of this, and then maybe end with the few patches I have made so far. Okay, so that's a quick little overview of how the Lfos functions and some of the things you can do. As you can see, I mean, it's really powerful. It's way more flexible than you might expect. I use it for drones and kind of curl style patches when I want to just sit with it by itself. Surprisingly, I really enjoy using the push 2 with it to play it. It's a lot more responsive than I expected, even routing through Ableton to do the MIDI routing. The fact that you can route velocity from push to CV outputs on the Lfos is pretty cool. The fact that it can do so many different things, the slope function generator can be, an LFO, it can be an envelope, it can be a gate, it can be an oscillator. I mean, there's really so many different ways to use this little unit, especially if you start using things like, multiple cables and whatnot. Very quickly, you can get very complex sounding patches happening from such a small little unit. Speaking of patch cables, one thing I do want to point out is it does come with some patch cables, but I found that's not nearly enough. Very quickly I was running out of, I had ideas I wanted to try and I had no more cables. So if you're thinking about the Lfos, definitely you're going to want to pick up some extra patch cables when you order one. Just thought I would point that out. As far as the sound of the Lfos, I mean, I find it works great on kind of deep, dirty, distorted basses. Obviously, the whole West Coast synthesis style kind of lends itself towards more atonal soundscapes and things like that. So once you start playing with some of these different functions and the different modules built in, I mean, very quickly you'll get in kind of atonal territory where it's not something you can necessarily play with a melody. That's not a bad thing. I mean, that's kind of a good thing. You can, of course, keep it more simplified, come up with patches that way, but for whatever reason, at least for me, I find that very quickly I go off in the noisy territory that might not be the most enjoyable to listen to, although it's a hell of a lot of fun to make. I'm really impressed with Make Noise and their support on this unit. They have YouTube videos for every single function of the unit, including overviews. They're doing a patch a week videos now. They have videos on all the different programmable MIDI modes that some people can find confusing. I've heard a few reviews say that how to get these programmable modes and change modes is kind of confusing. I didn't really think it was that difficult. Pretty quickly I picked up on how to do it and remembered the most common ones that I would use. And even if you forget, they've included a sticker on the bottom with all the functionality for those, so you don't even need to keep the manual handy in order to change what the MIDI outputs do. It's a much deeper synth than I expected it would be, even though tonally it can be kind of a unique one voice kind of thing. It definitely has its own sound, if I want to, I guess I could put it that way. But once you start putting effects on it, some reverb and delay, it goes off in all kinds of territories. As far as experimentation, I've actually really enjoyed playing with this. It's kind of satisfied the whole West Coast synthesis style that I wanted to get into. Just being able to shape sounds in a way that's quite different from your subtractive method is kind of refreshing. Like I said, it does tend to quickly get into noisy territory, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm still kind of figuring out how I will incorporate it into my workflow. Some things that kind of threw me out initially was the fact that I'd recorded all these patches and drones and things, and then realized they were completely out of tune. Like I didn't even realize that I had to tune the oscillator using a tuner, an Ableton or whatever, before I started recording. So that's something most modular people would know already, but for somebody new to modular synthesis, that was kind of a surprise. I have all these patches I have to go back and retune in live now. The other thing that kind of threw me off with the Lfos was the fact that outside of an octave or two when I first got it, it would drift quite drastically. It would go sharp or flat very quickly. Make Noise says that this is calibrated at the factory and you don't need to calibrate it when you get it. But I ran the calibration routine anyway, and that seemed to solve all the problems. So it's only a 3-4 minute process once the unit's properly warmed up, so I would definitely recommend that people do that if you get an Lfos. Overall, it's a really fun little unit. I mean, you can use it standalone. I mean, the fact you can use it with headphones and just kind of, tune out everything and just play with weird soundscapes and just having fun shaping sounds in new and unique ways, and often finding unexpected happy accidents that make electronic music so much fun. It's been really, really refreshing. Coming up with more usable melody ideas and things like that hasn't been quite as rewarding as I maybe would have hoped, but that's probably more down to my usage than the actual unit itself. So for the sheer amount of functionality and variety of sounds you can get out of this thing, I think it's really hard to not recommend it. Compared to something like the Mother 32, which might have like a warmer sound, a more familiar sound, I think there's a lot more variety you can do just with this unit on its own. It goes places I never expected, and there's oftentimes I'm stuck trying to decode what I've done because it sounds so crazy and I don't know how I did it. So it's a really fun unit to use. It's great value for the money. Even if you have a modular system already, the fact that you can use the different modules built in here in so many different ways with a modular system is pretty incredible, like as a MIDI to CV converter and things like that. I definitely think it's something I could recommend to anybody looking to get into modular synthesis who wants a slightly different take on how they craft their patches. Anyway, I hope that helps. If you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the comments as always, and I'll answer them as quick as I can. And I think we'll end this video with just some drone patches I've made over the last few weeks as I've gotten to know the Lfos. I don't have any videos of me showing actually patching things because, quite frankly, I find that really not very conducive towards creativity when I have the camera running. So hope you forgive the kind of static images I'll put over the top of that, and enjoy the sounds. Thank you.